There is a particular kind of silence that exists at a family dinner table when you say something honest. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. And the room shifts. Forks pause mid-air. Someone clears their throat. A glance passes between two people you love, and in that glance, you see it. The quiet agreement that you are, once again, too much, or not enough, or simply different. And you sit there, holding your words like something you weren't supposed to say out loud, wondering when exactly you became the one everyone has to manage. You've been here before, not just at this table, in the classroom where your questions made the teacher uncomfortable, in the friend group where your honesty felt like a threat, in the workplace where your instincts were right but your timing was difficult, in your own bedroom at 2 a.m, scrolling through your phone, wondering why fitting in always feels like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. This video is for you, not for who you're trying to become, for who you already are, right now, in all the ways that don't quite fit the frame. Take a breath. We're gonna go somewhere honest tonight. You probably didn't decide to be the black sheep. It wasn't a manifesto you wrote at age 7. It wasn't a role you auditioned for. It crept in quietly, like a draft through a window you forgot to close. One day you were just a child trying to belong, and somewhere along the way, the message started arriving in small, repeated packages. You are not quite right. Maybe it came from the way your mother described you to strangers. She's our complicated one. He's always been a little different. Maybe it came from the comparison that lived in the air of your household, like humidity you couldn't escape. A sibling who was easier, sunnier, more agreeable. And you weren't less, exactly. You were just louder in a quiet family, more sensitive in a stoic one, more questioning in a family that valued obedience, more tender in a world that rewarded toughness. You learned to read the room before you learned to read a book. You became fluent in the language of other people's discomfort. You knew when to shrink. You knew which parts of yourself to fold up and put away before entering certain rooms. You got good at translating yourself, making your ideas smaller, your feelings more digestible, your truth more palatable. And for a while, that translation felt like survival, because it was. You were not imagining it. The loneliness was real. The labor of constant self-editing was real. The way you would lie awake after a family gathering, replaying every sentence, every look, every moment where you felt the invisible wall between yourself and the people who were supposed to know you best. That exhaustion is real, but here is where it gets interesting. Here is where the story stops being just painful and starts being something more. There is a concept in family systems psychology that researchers and therapists call the identified patient. The idea is this: in every family system, there is usually one person who carries the emotional weight of what the rest of the family cannot or will not acknowledge. One person who acts out, who speaks up, who disrupts, who questions. And that person gets labeled as the problem, the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who can't just let things be. But here's the quiet truth underneath that label. The black sheep is often the most psychologically awake person in the room, not more intelligent, not more evolved, not better than anyone else in the family, but awake. Awake to dynamics no one wants to name, awake to grief that was never processed, awake to patterns that have been running for 3, 4, sometimes 5 generations, quietly shaping everyone inside the family without anyone ever stopping to examine them. You didn't create the dysfunction, you simply refused to go numb to it. And that refusal, that tiny stubborn refusal, is what made you feel so alone. Let that sit for a moment, because it changes something, doesn't it? It shifts the question from, what is wrong with me, to, what was I responding to? Psychologists who study family dynamics, particularly theorists like Murray Bowen, who developed what is now called family systems theory, describe this pattern with precision. In a system where anxiety runs high and emotional honesty runs low, the system needs a designated carrier, someone to externalize the tension, someone whose problems allow everyone else to avoid looking at themselves. The black sheep doesn't just happen. The black sheep is, in a very real and documented way, made. That doesn't mean you had no agency. It doesn't mean you were only ever a victim of circumstance. But it does mean that the story you've been carrying, the one that says you were born broken or fundamentally wrong, that story was written by a system under pressure, not by the full truth of who you are. Now, here is where we have to go a little deeper, because understanding the origin is only half of it. The harder question is, what did this do to you? When you spend your formative years as the family scapegoat, something happens to the way you relate to the world outside the family. You carry the role with you, not consciously. You don't wake up and decide to repeat the pattern. It just becomes the shape of your nervous system, the water you swim in, without noticing. In relationships, you may find yourself drawn to people who need fixing, because being useful is the only form of belonging you learned. Or you pull toward people who are emotionally unavailable, because love feeling uncertain is familiar, and familiar feels like safety even when it is anything but. In work, you might be relentlessly competent but chronically under-recognized, because some part of you still believes that if you just work a little harder, perform a little better, prove yourself one more time, finally the room will stop looking at you that way. That exhausting loop, that hamster wheel of seeking approval from people who were never going to give it freely. In your relationship with yourself, there may be a quiet cruelty that lives just beneath the surface, not loud self-hatred, something quieter and more persistent, a low hum of I am too much and I am not enough existing at the same time, in the same chest on the same ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Here is the unexpected twist. Sometimes the black sheep becomes so identified with the role of outsider that they begin to recreate the exclusion in new environments. They leave the family only to find a friend group where once again they are slightly on the edge. They leave that friend group for a new city, a new job, a new relationship, and somehow find themselves back in the familiar geography of not quite belonging. Not because they are doing something wrong, but because the nervous system learned that this is what love looks like. This is what home feels like. And it keeps navigating back to what it knows. This is what psychologists call repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to reenact unresolved emotional scenarios in the hope of finally getting a different ending. You are not broken for doing this. You are human. You are doing what every human nervous system does when it carries unprocessed grief. It finds a stage, casts new actors, and runs the play again. Sit with that gently, because blaming yourself for this pattern is just another version of the same wound. Here is what I want to say to you quietly, in the space between one breath and the next. You spent years learning to be acceptable. You studied the faces of the people you loved, learned their thresholds, their sensitivities, their need for you to be a certain shape. You became a cartographer of other people's comfort zones, and you were so good at it, so careful, so attentive, so endlessly, exhaustingly thoughtful. But no one was doing that for you. No one was studying your face that carefully. No one was learning the map of what you needed. No one was adjusting themselves to make room for your full self, your honest self, the self that asked too many questions and felt things too deeply and saw through the performance everyone else agreed to pretend was real. You did not fail to belong. You were never fully invited in. And there is a grief in that sentence that deserves to be felt, not bypassed. A grief that is not dramatic or performative, just quiet and real and yours. I spent so long making myself smaller that I forgot how large I actually was. That is the sentence at the center of this. That is where the pain lives. Not in the big dramatic moments, not in the fights or the estrangements or the holidays that went wrong. The pain lives in the slow, daily compression. The years of editing. The 1,000 small moments of choosing silence over honesty because the cost of honesty was too high. The accumulated weight of a self that was only ever partially expressed. And here is what that weight does over time. It settles into the body. It becomes posture. It becomes the way you hesitate before speaking in a group. It becomes the apology that arrives before your opinion does. It becomes the flinch when someone says your name in a tone you can't immediately read. It becomes the hypervigilance that other people call sensitivity or overthinking. but is actually just your nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. Scan for danger, stay small, stay safe. This is not a character flaw. This is an adaptation. A brilliant, costly, necessary at the time adaptation. The question now is, does it still need to be this way? There is a moment, and it comes differently for different people, when the cost of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of changing. For some, it comes in crisis, a relationship that ends, a body that breaks down, a loss that strips everything down to what is real. For others, it comes quietly, almost accidentally. A conversation with someone who sees you without flinching, a book that names something you thought was unnameable, a moment alone at the window with a cup of coffee, where something in you simply and quietly says, enough. Enough editing, enough performing, enough shrinking, not with anger, not with bitterness, with something more like tiredness, and underneath the tiredness, something that might be readiness. Shadow work, a framework developed by Carl Jung and later expanded by many therapists and thinkers, invites us to look at the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide, not to indulge them, not to celebrate every dark impulse, but to stop pretending they don't exist, because the things we refuse to look at don't disappear. They drive us from underneath. For the black sheep, the shadow often holds something unexpected. It holds not rage or resentment, though those may be there too, but something tenderer. It holds the original self, the self before the editing began, the child who had not yet learned that their honesty was a problem, their sensitivity was a burden, their difference was something to manage. That child is not gone. That child has been waiting very patiently in the part of you that still flinches at a particular kind of tone, that still lights up at a particular kind of connection, that still knows, somewhere underneath all the conditioning, what it actually feels like to be real. Inner child work is not about regression or sentimentality. It is about recognizing that the strategies we developed at age 6 or 8 or 12 are still running the show at 30, at 40, at 50, often without our awareness. And part of the path forward, not the whole path, just a part, is learning to speak to that younger version of yourself with the gentleness that was missing then. Not to fix them, not to rescue them, just to acknowledge them, to say, I see what you were carrying. I see how hard you worked. I see how much you loved people who didn't always know how to love you back in the language you needed. And it's okay that it was hard. It was hard. It is okay that it was hard. You don't have to perform being over it. You don't have to have resolved the family stuff, the childhood stuff, the belonging stuff before you are allowed to move forward. You are allowed to be both in process and in motion at the same time. You are allowed to be healing and still tender. You are allowed to be building something new while still sometimes feeling the grief of what the old cost you. Self-compassion, as researcher Kristin Neff has documented extensively, is not softness or self-indulgence. It is, in fact, one of the most powerful foundations for genuine change. Not the change that comes from shame and self-punishment, which produces compliance but not growth. The change that comes from being honest with yourself while staying on your own side. The change that comes from being as patient with your own process as you would be with someone you truly love. And here is where the path quietly opens, because the black sheep, when they begin to come home to themselves, often discovers something that catches them off guard. The qualities that made them the outsider in the original system, the sensitivity, the perceptiveness, the refusal to perform, the instinct for truth, these are not liabilities to be overcome. They are capacities. They are the particular shape of a mind that has been refined by pressure into something precise and rare. The people who ask the questions no one wants to ask. The people who sit with someone's pain without trying to immediately fix it. The people who can walk into a room and know within minutes where the tension is, what is being left unsaid, who is hurting beneath the performance. The people who refuse to let go of complexity even when everyone around them is reaching for simplicity. Those people are needed, not despite their difference, because of it. This doesn't mean it will be easy. It doesn't mean every room will suddenly recognize what you carry. Some rooms won't. Some families won't. Some systems are too invested in the old story to welcome the new one. And there is grief in that too. There is grief in accepting that certain people, even people you love deeply, may never be able to give you what you needed from them. That waiting for them to change, to see, to finally understand, may be a form of hope that is also a form of self-abandonment. Some doors do not open from the inside. You are allowed to stop knocking. You are allowed to turn around and walk toward the people and places and communities where your particular kind of honesty is not a problem to be managed, but a language that is actually spoken. Those places exist. Those people exist. They are often themselves some version of what you are, someone who never quite fit the original frame, who spent years in quiet exile from their own fullness, and who has been slowly, tentatively learning to take up space again. The belonging you were looking for was never going to be found by becoming more acceptable to people who couldn't accept you. It was always going to require becoming more genuinely yourself, and then finding, or building, or slowly growing the spaces where that self could land. That is not a small thing. It is not a quick thing, but it is a real thing. And you are not starting from zero. You have been preparing for this in your own way for longer than you know. Every moment you held your tongue and then felt the cost of it and remembered that cost is data. Every relationship where you bent yourself into shapes that didn't fit and then recognized the shape you'd bent into, that recognition is data. Every quiet moment of honesty with yourself or someone else, where something in you relaxed and you thought, oh, this is what it feels like to be real, that feeling is a compass. You already know what you are moving toward. You felt it in glimpses, in conversations that went 3 hours and felt like 20 minutes, in the rare room where you didn't have to translate yourself, in the moments of creative work or physical movement or deep quiet where the edited version of you went offline and something truer came through, clear and specific, and entirely your own. That is not a fantasy. That is a memory of who you are when the pressure lets up. And the question before you now, not as an assignment but as an invitation, is simply this: what would it look like to let that person out a little more? Not all at once, not dramatically, not with a public declaration or a confrontation or a burning of the old bridges, just a little more, just one honest sentence where there used to be a polished performance, just one choice to stay when you would usually disappear, just one moment of letting someone see you without the editing and noticing that the world did not end. It won't always be received perfectly. Some people will not know what to do with your realness. That's okay. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their discomfort was never your responsibility, even when you were 6 years old and the system handed it to you and said, "Here, carry this." You can put it down, not because it doesn't matter, not because the past wasn't real or the pain wasn't legitimate, but because you have carried it long enough, and because what's waiting for you on the other side of the carrying is not a perfect life or a healed family or a world that finally understands you. What's waiting is something quieter and more lasting. It is the experience of being in a room, any room, and feeling, not performing, not convincing yourself, but genuinely feeling. I am here. I take up space here. This is mine. I am not too much. I was simply in rooms that were too small. You came into this world with a particular frequency, a particular way of seeing and feeling and questioning and caring. That frequency was not a mistake. It was not a flaw in the design. Some systems couldn't hold it, that's true. Some people couldn't meet it, and that was their limitation, not the evidence of your brokenness. The black sheep is not the broken one. The black sheep is the one who couldn't pretend. And maybe, just maybe, that inability to pretend, that stubborn, inconvenient, costly refusal to go along with what didn't feel true, is exactly what led you here, to this moment, to this quiet, to this question that is not quite a question, but more of a beginning. What would it mean to finally, after all of it, belong to yourself? The table is still there, in your memory. The forks, the glances, the silence after your honest sentence. But you are not the child sitting at that table anymore. You are the one who learned to leave it, and to grieve it, and to carry it, and slowly, imperfectly, to begin building a different table entirely. one where the honest sentence doesn't stop the room, one where it starts the conversation.